Hi, Matriarch.
Sara Nelson is the, it's Zoom. Sara Nelson is the president of the Association of Flight Attendants, a CWA union. She represents 50,000 workers at 20 airlines, and she has been a union activist since 1996. She was labeled America's most powerful flight attendant, and dare we say it, one of America's most powerful union leaders. Sara Nelson, thank you for joining us today on Matriarch. It is all yours, the stage.
Thank you, Nomiki. This is extraordinary to be here tonight. And actually, I got to say, just what I needed. Being here with all of you is pretty extraordinary. And I can't believe that I'm here talking to you with powerhouses like Barbara Smith and Jane McAlevey and Cori Bush and so many other amazing women who are stepping up to the table, whether there's a chair there or not. And I just have to note that's quite an introduction, because when I saw that headline in the New York Times on the front page of the business section that said most powerful flight attendant, I have to say that I was a little taken aback, and I thought that maybe we were being a little bit made fun of because of our history. Because flight attendants had been set up to be commodities for the airlines. We were sexualized, and they ran marketing schemes with things like, I'm Cheryl, fly me. And you couldn't have this as a career. You had to quit when you were age 30 or when you got married or had a kid. You couldn't even be hired if you were a Black woman or Latino or a man, for that matter. And you had to step on a weight scale until 1992. And it's all of those things that the amazing women who came before me and built up this union fought back against and made it possible for anyone with the heart of a flight attendant to be one. And so as I started to take in the fact that the New York Times had made this a headline in their Sunday business section, and that the Delta Airlines CEO had a profile on page 4 that week, by the way, I started to take in the fact that the New York Times was saying flight attendant and powerful in the same headline. And that was really flipping the script. And that had been because women had fought back together, formed our own way, defined our careers, made it possible for us to have a way to fight forward. And so when the Me Too movement broke, that was about women standing together. That was about women saying, I've got your back. This week I asked, can we just please do away with the greeting, how are you? If you're going to ask the question, how are you? Make it mean something and sit there and be ready to take on what someone's going to give you. But that's not what we do. It's a throwaway. And so one of my sisters suggested to me, how about we just greet each other with, I love you and I've got your back. And that is exactly what happened with the Me Too movement and what made it possible for women to have each other's backs and tell their stories and actually speak up and not be dismissed. And at the time when that broke, I said to my union and to my staff, we've got to get on this because we're going to get calls, because people are going to look around and say, gee, who might have stories about sexual harassment at work? And certainly flight attendants have experienced them. And so we got stories from flight attendants all over the place. And certainly they reinforced my own stories that I could tell about someone coming up behind me when I'm setting up the galley and a man rubbing my hip and saying, oh, no girdle? How can you look so good without a girdle? And then really dismissing me in front of other union leaders in the middle of a tough bargaining time, with a management person asking me for a hug in front of everyone. You know, these are the things that we have had to fight against and fight straight through. And so we have carved out our own path, and that's what my union did. We defined our role as aviation's first responders. We became certified. We built into the regulations that flight attendants have to be on the plane in order for planes to take off. So surely they don't take off without pilots, but they also don't take off if flight attendants are not there either. And we did all of that, but then the Me Too movement broke. And all of a sudden, we had the ability to demand that we not only be not seen that way, but other people give us respect. That we not only have respect for each other and know that we can take care of ourselves, but that we can demand that respect from the rest of society. And so we asked people to tell their stories. And I got all kinds of stories. I got stories about sexual harassment. I also got a story like this. where a man who was a flight attendant told me that he was working a flight from LA to Sydney. And he was in the galley, in the business class galley, and he turned around and looked into the aisle to see how things were going, see what his flying partners needed. And he saw one of his flying partners who was going down the aisle with some champagne glasses, and a passenger reached out and hit her on the rear end. And he got his back up and stood there in the aisle and was ready to go defend her. And she whipped around and she said to that passenger, she said, "You, if you were half as good looking as you think you are, you might stand a chance, but you're not. So sit down and shut up and don't you touch anyone else on this flight." And then she turned around to my friend and she said, "And you get back in the galley where you belong. I don't need a man to take care of me. I can take care of myself." So we heard stories like that. And that was the attitude that we could inspire, because we knew that we had each other's backs on the planes, but we never expected anyone else to have our backs for us. And so it was a painful time actually hearing these stories that people would work through it. I was in a crew room and I heard flight attendants from 6 months on the job to 20 years on the job who would tell me stories. And I would say, "And then what do you do?" And they would say, "Well, we put them in their place, tell them not to, whatever." And I'd say, "Every time?" And then the conversation would really start. And they'd say, "It was a full airplane. I had to take care of everyone else. I had to keep going. No, I didn't report it to management. What were they going to do?" And I'd have to report it through the cockpit, who wouldn't listen to me. And then we did a survey and we found that only 7% of flight attendants had felt that they could report the issue, and only half of them said that they would encourage other flight attendants to do the same. But nearly 2/3 had experienced sexual harassment or physical harassment in the prior year alone. And we heard all these stories, but we were not hearing from the men. We're 80% women on the job, but we were not hearing from our brothers. And so I asked some of them, because I have seen some of them be objectified just like any of the women that I work with. And I asked them, "Why aren't you telling your stories?" And they said to me to a T, they said, "Sara, we're in a workforce of 80% women. This is a moment for women's equality. If we want to have any power at the bargaining table to get what we truly deserve for the work that we do for these airlines, we have to make sure that women have equal footing everywhere." And so that's true. Making sure that women have the ability to join unions and run unions, negotiate our contracts where there's automatically equal pay. That's all about improving our bargaining position, improving our place in society, and being able to step up to every single table. And so I go everywhere telling women, join unions and run unions, because the labor movement is not a club. The labor movement is for working people. Right now, during this pandemic, we are seeing all of the problems with the fact that our labor movement has been reduced to almost nothing in this country. With this exception, the airline industry is 80% organized. We've seen crisis before. We've seen how there are people who, when you're grieving, when you're trying to make it through, when there's all kinds of slogans about, being an American and picking yourself up by your bootstraps and making sure that we can get by and everybody sacrifices equally. Well, that's all true. There's a lot of solidarity in this country. And that spirit of solidarity is real and exists in the working class, but it does not exist in the corporate class. In fact, they take advantage of it. During this pandemic, they've called us essential workers, applauded us, had big parades of applauding from windows around the country, said that people should be getting hazard pay. And yet in the negotiations in Congress, when talking about hazard pay, the corporations lobbied hard to make sure that it would be voluntary, because they said, we can't raise expectations for workers. And if we give this pay to them now, they're going to expect more after the pandemic too. The truth is that without unions, we've driven to a place where people can't live through a $400 unexpected expense. 8 million people have gone into poverty. Almost 60 million people have filed for unemployment. And in March, what we did, because we're 80% organized, is the chairman of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, who would see through what the relief would look for airlines who had lost 97% of our traffic overnight, said to the airlines, I'm not talking to you until you talk to labor. And so we had a negotiations about what our federal relief package was going to look like. And we created a federal relief package that was workers first. We said to the airlines, you've squeezed everyone so hard, America hates you, and you're not going to get anything unless you work through us. And so we created a relief package, not a stimulus. Let's face it, we're in the middle of this crisis, but a relief package that was workers focused. Number one, all of the money had to go to covering the pay and benefits of the workers, had to go to the workers, could not be spent on anything else. If you leave it up to the market applauds furloughs, applauds layoffs, applauds companies getting smaller because they're going to be spending less on labor. It also said you cannot cut pay rates because that's the other thing that they'll try to inspire during a time like this. And it said that you must continue service to all communities that you served on March 1st, because no one should have to suffer. If we're giving you federal dollars to keep the airlines going, then we should make sure that all of our communities are getting that service equally, continuing to get the US mail and everything else that our airlines connect us to. So it's a jobs and infrastructure plan. 1.25% of the entire $2 trillion CARES Act, because we're 80% union in the airline industry. So it wasn't a bailout, and it especially wasn't a bailout. We made really sure, because we added restrictions on those executives too. A cap on executive compensation and no stock buybacks or dividends well after the relief period is over. But October 1st was when those requirements ended. And the airline industry is just back to 40% of the demand it was a year ago, and half of that revenue in place. And that is because we have a president who not only before this virus said it was okay to handle women. We've had people on the planes touch women and sexually assault them and say, well, why can't I do it? The president of the United States can do it. And then during this virus, denying it, not giving us the information that we needed to combat it. We fought hard in our union to have OSHA training to be able to combat this at work and stop communicable disease at transportation store. I know what it looks like when our government works with unions and industry and has a plan in transportation and actually goes to the source and puts US resources in the place where the virus, where the contagion has started, so that we can try to nip it in the bud before it works its way around the rest of the world. I know what it looks like when you have a plan. I also know what it looks like when we have a president who has done nothing but try to divide us and keep us at odds with each other and have us believe that politics are identity. We need women to lead going forward. Matriarch is the most important place where you can put your dollars right now, because the only people who are going to lead us forward out of this are people who understand what it means to have a union contract, who understands what it means to negotiate and have collective power, and who understands what it means to be marginalized. And so we have learned to lead without ego. And we've learned to bring people together. And we've also led strike votes and real strike threats and run strikes too. And that has meant bringing everyone together and saying, here are our demands. Here is what we need. We have way more in common than anything that can divide us. So it doesn't matter what you look like, where you come from, or who you love. We're in this together, and we're going to have each other's backs. That's the spirit that Matriarch brings to the political process. We need that kind of thought in government everywhere. We need to support people who are willing to run with those ideals, who have lived them, who have done them. That's how we're going to heal our nation. That's how we're going to solve the big problems before us. And that's how we're going to understand that immigration rights are workers' rights. That tackling the climate crisis is about making sure that workers have access to good jobs, and that workers have clean communities to go home to and good drinking water to have for their families. These are our issues as working people. And I just want to close out with one thing, and that is, don't be afraid of your emotions, and don't let them say that your emotions are a weakness. Your emotions are your superpower. As Mother Jones put it, don't be ladylike. She said, I'm not a humanitarian, I'm a hellraiser. No matter what the fight, don't be ladylike. God Almighty made women, and Rockefeller and his gang of thieves made the ladies. We have real power as women because we have each other's backs, and because we know how to get things done, and because we're never going to go away, never going to stop. I am so proud to be on the Matriarch board. I encourage everyone to put your dollars here. These are dollars well spent, and lift up every candidate that Matriarch supports. Thanks to the entire board, thanks to Nomiki, thanks to the amazing women who are with me here tonight. And let's move forward together. Solidarity.